Hello and welcome to the Christopher and Dana Reeve Paralysis Foundation professional webinars. We have a guest today. I'm Nurse Linda, as you probably know. Today we have a guest who is a Renaissance woman of spinal cord injury. She is the director of the Northeast Ohio Regional SEI Model Systems, a staff scientist, and a Metro Health professor of physical medicine and rehabilitation at Case Western Reserve University. She's the associate director of the Institute of Functional Restoration, an investigator at the Cleveland FES Center, a place that's dear to my heart. And her interests are model systems, paralysis, pain, and innovative rehab technologies. And so with that, I present Kim Anderson Ersman, PhD, who I have known for a long time through conferences and through her work, of course. So welcome, Kim. It's very nice having you here today.
Thank you.
I always like to start with just finding out how people get interested in studying research, how they get interested in spinal cord injury. Everybody always seems to have a story of how they got there. So could you tell us a little bit about yours?
Yeah, for sure. Well, it all started when the first person that I met with a spinal cord injury was myself. And I had a spinal cord injury when I was 17. And I was always interested in science as a kid. And I decided after I graduated high school and dealing with spinal cord injury, I went to college for biology. And as I was evolving in college and evolving and dealing with my spinal cord injury, I was starting to become interested in spinal cord injury research. And so from there, I had a couple of really encouraging professors that encouraged me to go to graduate school. And they told me, only really your brain is the most important thing. Doesn't matter about your hands or anything like that. And so I took a leap of faith. I got accepted into PhD graduate school and went on to career in spinal cord injury research from there.
Well, I find that people in the community do a lot of research in spinal cord injury and have a wealth of knowledge. So I'm sure you're in a crowd of people like you today. So that's a great situation to be in. So you have this very interesting background. So one of your line of research inquiry is spinal cord injury research in the study of Schwann cells. So now I'm assuming that's bench research that's done in the laboratory. Have you done bench and clinical research with people with that? And could you just tell us what Schwann cells are and tell us more about that research?
Right. Well, so first, it's not my own individual line of research. This was when I was at the University of Miami at the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis. And some of their investigators, led by the Dr. Bunge, they have been looking into Schwann cell biology for several years and looking at how can that potentially be applicable for spinal cord injury. So Schwann cells are the cells in everybody's body, and they wrap around the nerves that are all throughout your body, everywhere except for the brain and the spinal cord. So they basically form the insulation around all of those nerve fibers and are really critical for those nerves to be able to send signals to repair themselves if they get injured and all of those kinds of things. So the Bunges and several other investigators at the Miami Project over several years showed in cellular models as well as in animal models that Schwann cells, if you were to transplant them into the injured spinal cord, can help repair some of the damage. So when I was at the Miami Project from 2009 to 2018, I helped them lead a couple different clinical trials testing Schwann cells for humans with spinal cord injuries. And the initial one was transplanting people's Schwann cells right after their injury. So that was an acute intervention. And then the second one was transplanting Schwann cells in people with chronic spinal cord injury. And both of those trials were first in human, and they were really targeted towards safety. They had a very small number of people, and they both showed that it was safe to transplant your own Schwann cells. So they were cells taken from whoever was the participant. You take out some of peripheral nerve, you purify the Schwann cells, and then you inject them back into the spinal cord. So it was proven to be safe, both in the acute setting and in the chronic setting. Did you have more specific questions with that information?
So it's important to notice that the nerves were taken from the peripheral nervous system and placed into the central nervous system, which is a bit unusual. And then it was found to be safe. Has there been any progress in that? Any forward movement in that type of research?
Right. Well, I can't speak for the Miami project since I left, but I know that they are still actively studying Schwann cells and using them in combination with other factors. So like a combinatorial treatment in animals. I know that they are also running a parallel trial where they are helping people with severe peripheral nerve injury and then transplanting their Schwann cells into that environment, which is a little bit different situation than transplanting into the spinal cord. But they are still very actively studying Schwann cells for spinal cord injury there at the Miami Project. So I would refer anyone to the Miami Project website to see what is their latest work that they are pursuing there.
So there's a lot of research that's going on in transplanting nerves, transplanting stem cells. The transfer of nerves in the periphery system is a lot easier. Nothing is easy in the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
But compared to the central nervous system, is a lot easier. So it's a good idea to take note of that for anybody who has a spinal cord injury, or if you have spinal cord injury from disease, if you have brain injury. The research in one area affects the research in all the other areas. So it benefits everyone when you become aware of these kinds of studies and things that are going on. So that is really neat that you got to be involved in that, because that is such a big step forward, although there's many more steps to follow, but it was a big step forward, and that was a real historic situation that happened. So let's talk more about some of your other research endeavors. So prosthetic is a spinal cord treatment that has been around for a while, but it's really booming right now. So can you tell us more about what is a neuroprosthetic? A lot of people aren't familiar with that terminology.
Yeah, and people have different definitions of it, but in general, a neuroprosthetic is some sort of device that can be used to replace a nervous system function. Most of the neuroprosthetics for spinal cord injury involve neurostimulation. And so some examples that people may be familiar with, some of the oldest examples are, surface stimulation, where you put a little sticky pad on the surface of your skin over a peripheral nerve, and you can stimulate it, or you can stimulate the muscle, and that will create a contraction. And then people in the 80s and 90s started doing certain implants where you could implant a stimulator so that it would stimulate a peripheral nerve. And for example, in spinal cord injury, give a hand grasp. There was a product that was approved in the late 90s called the Freehand that was doing that. There's been a couple evolutions of that and expanding out where you they have implants for the legs so that you could do a standing transfer, or if you put in enough technology, some people can do assisted walking with those types of stimulators. as well as the diaphragm pacing system is applicable for some individuals that use a ventilator. If their diaphragm is still, if it still responds to stimulation, that's a device that can be put in, and basically it's like a pacemaker for the diaphragm instead of a pacemaker for the heart. And it can help some individuals get off of the ventilator and breathe on their own. That's all, it's all stimulating the peripheral nerve in those situations. And then more recently, I would say in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been more research and studying spinal stimulation.
Mhm.
And so that would be like epidural stimulation, or which is where they implant a spinal stimulator over the surface of the spinal cord, and they actually stimulate the spinal cord to help generate movement possibilities. And then there's also the transcutaneous spinal stimulation, which is non-invasive. And so they would put little sticky electrodes over a certain area on the outside of the spine and look at that also for enhancing spinal function. So the transcutaneous and the epidural stimulation is probably what people nowadays are much more familiar with, but there are a lot of different varieties of neuroprosthetics involving stimulation for spinal cord injury.
Well, I loved your walk down the history path of all that. I was lucky enough to be involved in implantation of the hand function devices, which was at the time, it's been about 20 years ago that we were doing them. And they were quite fabulous, but quite expensive, and insurance did not cover them. So I think that was the big showstopper with that, was accessibility to that. It was a nice device. It was a little tricky to learn to use, but once you got it down, it was really well used by people. But now with the transcutaneous, putting the patches on over the spinal cord on the outside of the skin, people are getting a lot of function with that. That's a lot more easier than having the surgery and all these kinds of things. So it's nice to see how all of this has evolved. You know, when you have it and it's new and this is the best that you have, it's great.
Yeah.
But it's lovely to see how all of this stuff has just pushed on and been refined. And we have had a couple of professional webinars on the spine stimulators. One with Dr. Reggie Edgerton at UCLA in California, and the other one with the Onward Company. So if you want to, those links can be put in the chat box. So if any of our viewers want to look back at any of those, you would have the opportunity to do that. So what do you predict for, we've gone down what has happened. What do you predict for the future of neuroprosthetics?
I think, so if I think about neuroprosthetics and I think about spinal cord injury and I think about treatments for spinal cord injury, I think that neurostimulation and neuroprosthetics will probably be successful earlier than drugs or biologics cells. I think because there's a lot of understanding in all of the areas, but it's a little bit easier. There's been successes already in devices with neurotechnology. There's a little bit of a pathway that people can follow. And if, for example, if Onward is successful in getting their transcutaneous stimulation or their epidural stimulation approved in the US, that creates an even better pathway for other companies to follow. Getting the approval and getting the insurance payment are two big hurdles, and they're two separate hurdles. Yeah. So, we've got to have success in getting over both of those hurdles in order for any of the neuroprosthetics to be widely available to people.
Well, and so there's, for our listeners, there's Onward. If you want to look at their website, you can get on their mailing list and get information. It does not mean that you are signed up or that you've been approved. It just means you're going to get more information. And I always think having the information is just good. Even if you think, I am fine the way I am, I'm not really interested in this kind of thing, that's fine too. You don't have to do it. But just knowing that what's out there, it kind of helps you decide, is it time for me? Do I want to wait a while? So there's Onward, there's Spinex, and then there's a lot available right now through the Cleveland FES Center, which I have been really impressed with their products that they have, because they kind of have what I describe as a modular system. So you can start with one piece of the puzzle and you can add different pieces and change and rearrange. So as you become more functional, you might want to add more implants or more devices so you can become even more functional. And if you decide that's not for you, that's okay.
Yeah.
So, but having that information, knowledge is power, and it really truly is, because you might be thinking, well, I'm fine, I'm doing my life the way I am. And then every once in a while, something's going to come up and you might think, I think I'd like to try that. That's just the way it is in healthcare. So, a lot of these products are new. They did get slowed down. A lot of the research got slowed down with COVID, and, everything slowed down with COVID. So that was a huge problem, but it's all coming to fruition now and coming pretty quickly. So for your people that have use these neuroprosthetics, what has been their opinion of them? What have they thought? What has been the big plus in their life, and what's been the big negative in their life?
Well, I've talked to a lot of different people. I'm actually a user of a neurotechnology as well, a neuroprosthetic. I have an implant of a stimulation device that stimulates my hand function and my core trunk function. And so in general, like from my own experience and in different conversations I've had with other people with various neuroprosthetic neurostimulation technologies, people really find pretty significant functional value in them, and they're pretty easy to incorporate into your everyday life. But, if they, like everything, every technology in the world runs into issues. And so, troubleshooting those issues, it could be variable. It all depends on the different type of technology. And there's things that are real simple that, software programming can fix. And then, you go all the way to the other extreme where you might have to have a surgery to fix whatever is the issue. But the problem is, with all of the different neuroprosthetics that are out there that we know of right now, they're all still in the research phase. So the only way you can access them is via being a participant in a clinical trial. And even if you wanted it, if you had all the money in the world, you couldn't buy it because that would be illegal. It's not like you can go and, really get it serviced if you wanted to change things, like as if it were a company and you are paying for what you want for. You are part of the research process and the clinical trial. And clinical trials by nature are designed to answer questions. And so they have protocols that people have to follow. And so you have to fit within that protocol. But overall, I think that, my own personal experience has been positive. And I think everyone that I've talked to, with other types of peripheral stimulators or diaphragm pacers or epidural stimulation, and even the transcutaneous spinal stimulation, they've had positive results with it.
And so how would you get in one of those clinical trials?
Right. I believe there's a lot of resources that are going into the chat box right now. There's several different websites where you can find information about clinical trials. And pretty much on all of those websites, you'll have contact information, either for the investigator leading the trial or one of their study team members. And I would just reach out to those people if the clinical trial overview information sounds interesting to you and you think you might be qualified in it, or even if you just want to find out more information, reach out and connect with the researchers running that trial.
And I want to say yes and reinforce that, because every researcher I've ever known has loved to talk to people from the community. because when they talk to people from the community, they get real questions and they hear real situations, and it helps them learn. And so I've yet to hear anybody who's, sometimes people, oh no, that person's important, maybe I shouldn't call them. Yes, go ahead, send them an email, go ahead and call them. Now they might refer you to an assistant or something. They might have a person who just does nothing but answer people's questions. So please feel free to go ahead and do that. If a clinical trial is in an area of the country, maybe you can't get there, or maybe you don't qualify, or you're just interested, because of regulations, when people do clinical trials that are supported by government funds, they are required to put their findings out. So you can follow along in those clinical trials by going to some of these different websites and finding out what's going on. And then you can take that information to your healthcare professional and say, do you think this is something that might help me? It might be a neuroprosthetic. It might be a dietary supplement. It might be a physical exercise that you can do that might be something helpful. So, it's good to keep up on those. It helps you kind of see what's out there and what's going on, because as Dr. Ersman was saying, it's, there's clinical trials at the bench science level. There's trials in movement, medications, implants,
Diet therapies.
Lots of diet therapies.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So now that makes me think of, you are very tuned into the community, which is one of the reasons why I use you as a resource. I contact Dr. Anderson Ersman on occasion, and she has always got the answer, which I always say, wow, okay, this is great. So how do you keep connected with the community?
Well, having a spinal cord injury, I've made lots and lots and lots of friends with spinal cord injury. And, as I mentioned, I was the first person that I ever met with a spinal cord injury because I had never known anything about it before. And as I was going, I've been injured almost 34 years now, and I didn't go through that injury alone. I learned so much information about living with spinal cord injury from the friends I made with spinal cord injury.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went into research and I learned the biology and all of those other things. But the real world knowledge of living with spinal cord injuries is in the hands of the people living with spinal cord injury. So I've always, always, always tried to, make as many connections as I can with people living out in the community. And it's fueled a lot of my research to have the voice of people with spinal cord injury incorporated into research, because that's how we will advance, so that everybody benefits. But so, since I've gone on to, more levels, I try to connect other people in the community with others, connect different organizations together that I learn of, and try to just really stay connected to the community and connect others in the community.
And I thank you for that work. And I want to point out as well that the Christopher and Dana Reeve Paralysis community has a peer mentor program. So some people are in areas where they don't know anyone else with a spinal cord injury. So that's a good opportunity. Some people have people that they know in their community, but maybe they have a question that they don't want to ask their close friend or something. Usually people kind of get over that privacy thing or personal issues, they want to know an answer. So they go to people who know the answers. And so if you want a more anonymous kind of thing, you can contact the Reeve Foundation and you can ask me questions, or, you can contact the peer mentors, and they're very helpful. They'll connect somebody in your area that can help you find things and what you need to do in that. So a big thank you for keeping contact with the community. Let's go ahead and talk about some questions, because we have a lot of questions that people have written in here. And I'll just zoom down the questions. So I'm going to put a couple of the questions together. So some people have written in about geriatric late onset tumor in the spine population, and as well as individuals with spina bifida, and how all these things connect. Are people with these kinds of issues, can they take advantage of the Schwann cells, the neuroprosthetics, the community connections?
Yeah, usually we learn a lot from different diseases and different conditions. Spina bifida and spinal cord injury and spinal tumors have certain things in common, and they have other things that are different. And so neurostimulation may potentially be something that could be helpful in different ways across multiple conditions. And so I would always refer someone to talk with their healthcare provider about what might be useful for their situation. But yes, many things are translatable to other conditions. It may not be the exact same way, but it may be similar.
Yes, what helps one helps us all. We have another question about a person who's having some pain. I'm going to assume by the drugs that they're listing here, neuropathic pain. And so do you have any suggestions for people with neuropathic pain?
Yeah, it's an incredibly difficult situation to live with. I've been collaborating with one of my colleagues that I met at the University of Miami, Dr. Eva Widerstrom Noga, who is still at the Miami Project. And we have been doing interviews of people living with neuropathic pain for about the last 6 or 7 years, and learning their experiences, how they manage pain. And we're developing an educational tool that will be available soon next year for people to download and read, share with their family and friends, share with their healthcare providers. But what we have learned most from people living with neuropathic pain is they tend to identify a combination of things that help them take the edge off the pain. So usually some sort of medication, but we all know that medication doesn't solve all of the pain issues. There's usually some sort of self-management activities that they do as well, like either exercise or maybe a massage or hot or cold or stretching, things like that. And then they manage and they cope by talking with other people living with neuropathic pain and sharing the information and the knowledge that you're not alone. But really the biggest thing is you have to be open to trying anything, because you never know what's going to work for you, because what works for someone else related to pain may not work for you, and what works for you may not have worked for someone else. So I guess the take-home message is, don't expect the medication to take the pain away, because we just don't have good medication for that. But there are a lot of combinations of things that you can do to manage your pain so that you can still have an active life.
Yeah, and neuropathic pain is interesting because it's different for everyone. Everybody describes it's different. Some people will have very mild pain, and some people have excruciating pain. Some people feel like it just itches all the time, and that's that nerve giving some miscommunication and messages. So just don't give up on it. Keep going with it. Combinations of medications. There is Neurontin and Lyrica that's developed for neuropathic pain. Medications all have side effects. So, you have to weigh your risk and balances. And that's, it's a lot of trial and error in dealing with pain. That is for sure. So just keep at it, because you can eventually get somewhere. I know my husband had a lot of neuropathic pain. He took a lot of medication for his neuropathic pain, but it never completely went away. But when it would get really bad, he would use distraction. He would want to play a card game where he'd have to think about what he was doing. So that it took away, and then, it's kind of like, well, let's play a card game, but let's have fun and joke while we do it, because he wanted his mind to be in a different place. And so people have different ways. And I think that's wonderful that when you talk to people in the community, and I like this idea of the community, because boy, that's where you really find out the real deal, so that's really good. Okay, here's a big question. What's the biggest barrier in translating research to clinical practice?
A single barrier?
Can you name just one? I
There
bet
are
you could name
so
like
many
100.
barriers.
Yes. Yeah.
I think, well, one of the biggest barriers, well, yeah, I don't even know that I want to call it a barrier, but one thing, we generate a lot of knowledge in our research. Unfortunately, not all of that knowledge goes into clinical practice. So it's sometimes almost like there's too much knowledge, and we all get overwhelmed with it. It's very hard to change clinical practice because you're basically changing behavior, and what healthcare providers have learned during their education and during their experience. So sometimes people wait until they see a drug or a cell type or, like a neuro device that gets approved by the FDA, as like something tangible. So one barrier is you've got to get those things approved by the FDA. But then just because it gets approved doesn't mean that it gets taken up into practice. You have to get approval for reimbursement via CMS. That's the next thing. But then you have to get buy-in by all the healthcare providers, to look at all the evidence, weigh, what they think might be the risks and benefits of their particular patient, and then make that decision of whether they want to incorporate it into clinical practice. So I feel like we've made significant advances in spinal cord injury, getting up to things that have the potential of being approved by the FDA, but we have not moved the needle very much beyond that in getting things into clinical practice. And as you were mentioning earlier, it might be like a nutrition type of thing, or a way, like maybe a new way to do therapy, rehab. We still haven't gotten those things to really be incorporated widespread in clinical practice.
Mhm.
So and part of it is the variability of spinal cord injury. I feel like we need a lot of tools in our arsenal, and then we just have to keep on pushing. We have to keep on pushing. And the way that the healthcare system is in the United States now, without going into a big topic there, clinicians have a lot of pressures on them. It's not easy to change things in the healthcare system just because they want to change it. There's a lot of things that clinicians have to juggle with as well. I can't give a single answer to that.
I know, but what you're saying, I have lived, because working with the Christopher Reeve Recovery Project, which has been some time ago, but there were some radical and revolutionary things that were done, and he did get return of function and improve his central nervous system. But yet people would call us up on the phone and say, you've made all this up, this is not true. And it was really hard to even convince colleagues in our own institution that no, actually this here's the proof. We have the scientific proof. And of course now a lot of this is just standard of practice, but at the time it was just people would laugh at you openly. And, now I go to conferences and it's like, okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just, they say it takes 20 years to get something into practice, and it's been about 20 years later. So there you have it. I guess that's true. Here's a person that has written in about their son has a T2 to 3 complete injury, and he works out. He has an FES cycle, but he got a standing chair and he's having trouble being in the standing position. So what would you recommend?
Well, yes. So that sounds, anyone with an injury at T6 or above is going to have issues with orthostatic hypotension when they go from sitting to standing. So I would recommend, working with your healthcare provider. There are things, basically, when he is standing up, his blood pressure is dropping because of the limited circulation and because of the spinal cord injury.
And the heart beats faster to try to make up for it.
Yeah. So there are things like he could wear those tight elastic stockings to help bring blood pressure up from the leg, or blood volume up from the legs. You can wear abdominal binder. And then working with the healthcare provider, there may be some types of medications that might be helpful with that. But you do want to kind of slowly work your way up from sitting to standing so that your body can slowly be able to be in an upright position and then not get dizzy.
Exactly. Takes time.
Yes.
You can't just zoom up there. You know, it's like people who have been sitting for a long time, if they have a spinal cord injury or not, and they stand up real quick, and sometimes it's like, whoa, I get it takes the heart a little while to get regulated. And if you have a spinal cord injury, that's a little bit slower.
Yeah.
So that's an issue as well. But that's a correctable issue. So that's good to know for that. Here's a person that was in a drug trial, but they got the placebo, not the drug. And so now they want the drug. So any suggestions to them? The study slowed down because of the COVID, so it's not gone to market yet.
Well, if it's an experimental drug that doesn't have any kind of FDA approval, unfortunately, you won't be able to get it outside of the clinical trial. There are some clinical trials that use FDA-approved drugs where they're, testing to see if it might be useful in a different situation. And sometimes, like, you may be able to go to your physician, talk about your experience in the trial, and ask, does your clinician think it might be useful for you, for him or her, to prescribe that drug for you? Because clinicians can prescribe certain things in what they call off-label indications, but it has to be where they feel it's really going to benefit you and not hurt you. Unfortunately, if something doesn't have any kind of approval, there's not really any way to get to it until it does get to the market.
Just wait. Now, sometimes people who have been in the trial will be offered like first dibs on the drug, but that really does not mean that much. You still have to get it prescribed for you. And, so if it's limited distribution, but it's approved, sometimes people who are in a trial will be the first ones to get the drug then for their real life, but it still has to be approved. So those are, those finessing those little details. It's always, so there's a person that has written in about they're taking baclofen for their spasticity, and they're wondering about how they can stop progression of scoliosis from being in a chair and a bed for years. So it's two questions here, but well, they're kind of combined because spasticity certainly can pull on those muscles and do that scoliosis. So your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess first on the scoliosis or spinal curvature that can happen. I have a spinal curvature myself. Originally started because the wheelchair I was in for the first 6 years was too big for me. And so things were moving around and I started to develop a spinal curvature. And by the time that I realized it and I went and talked to a physician about it, I was going to have to need pretty significant surgery to straighten it out. So, there are abdominal binders or braces that you might be able to wear, but definitely I would talk to your physician about the scoliosis or curvature, whichever it may be, and ask what you can do to stop it from getting worse. Or if there are possibilities, surgical possibilities to try to correct it. But I would definitely want to do everything you can to try to stop making it worse. And with respect to baclofen, what was the question really specifically for baclofen?
Is there anything besides baclofen that will help?
For spasticity? There's a lot of things out there for spasticity. There's a lot of different medications. And then there's also some things like there's literature out there that whole body vibration can sometimes help to reduce spasticity. Stretching helps to reduce spasticity. I've never taken any medication for spasticity, and I have like mild spasticity, and I use it to my advantage in certain ways. But one thing I will say is that if you are taking baclofen, don't just stop taking it, because that can be very dangerous. If you're not happy with the way it's helping the spasticity or the side effects of it, work with your physician to reduce yourself off of that very slowly and see if there's a different drug that may be helpful for you.
And a lot of people are turning to Botox as well.
Yeah, that can be useful for certain types of spasticity in different locations.
And I did want to mention too that there are some flexible rods for scoliosis surgery. It doesn't give you full mobility, but it doesn't hamper mobility as much as the solid rods help. So those are kind of new, and not everybody knows about those. So I just wanted to bring that up. There's a question in the chat box, so we're gonna circle around back here. It says, "What does a pacemaker for the diaphragm feel like, and does it hurt?" That's a big question with these electrical therapies, because people think, oh, I'm going to get a shock every single time.
Right. Well, I don't have a diaphragm pacer, but I do have an implanted stimulation device that would be providing stimulation that's probably at pretty similar levels as a diaphragm pacer would. And it, like when I turn my stimulation device on, it just feels like a muscle contraction. It doesn't feel painful at all. And usually when you have stimulation that's happening inside the body, it's at much, much, much lower levels than would be required if it was happening outside the body, like trying to go on the surface of your skin in. So the diaphragm pacer it's implanted into the diaphragm and the phrenic nerve. And it takes a very small amount of stimulation to make the diaphragm pace. And so some people may not even feel the stimulation happening.
Which is kind of nice. Nice for that to be that way. There's a comment from a listener who says, "Don't just stop baclofen. She's coming from someone who did." And from having patients who have done that, you know, especially, I don't want to pick on any gender, but especially men will say, you know, I'm tough, I can do it. It's not that way. It's affected the chemicals in your body. And so you need to slowly titrate off those to get your body used to being without it. Also, if you just stop it and you go through that withdrawal, which is really very uncomfortable, and it's really tough because of the baclofen, because your muscles cramp up and it's really hard to do. And then if you go on another drug, or if you decide, well, I need to go back on the baclofen, the amounts are all different to control your spasticity. So it's even harder to control the spasticity if you've gone cold turkey. So just don't do it. You're not a wimp. It's just your body has changed chemically. So you need to kind of do that. You need to titrate off. So, and talk to your healthcare professional. Don't just do it on your own. So here's another question is, how do you get chosen for some of these trials and applications?
Well, every trial has what they call inclusion and exclusion criteria. And depending on the trial, especially if it's something brand new and it may be, they don't know if it's dangerous or not, they may have very strict criteria on who can be eligible for it. So like there's one resource that I really like to refer people to, which is STItrials.org. You can go onto that website, you can search for things that you're interested in specific to your injury, and then it's got a way that you can contact the researchers that are running that trial. And so you really have to make that effort to reach out to the researcher, and there's a lot of other websites that you can go to as well. Reach out to the researcher, say you're interested, and then go from there, because usually it'll end up having to be a conversation. And if they think that you sound like you are maybe eligible, then you start the process and you would go to wherever the research is located, and they would most likely do some screening evaluations of you to see if you meet all of the criteria for that particular trial. And they're not trying to just keep everybody out of clinical trials. There really are reasons as to why some are more strict than others. And it really is all about safety, number one, and then whatever question they're trying to answer, number two. So if you don't reach out though, you can't get the process started.
And sometimes some of these clinical trials are in short duration, so you might be able to travel and participate in the trial. Sometimes you don't have to be in the area. Sometimes they have questionnaires that are sent to people. So there's all kinds of opportunity that you can participate in big ways. And sometimes if you're filling out a questionnaire, you think, well, this is kind of simple, but it's important because it's getting that information of what you are going through. What is your opinion about this? And those are really critical. So if you have that kind of bent that you want to help other people as well as yourself, the clinical trials are really important to get involved with those.
And
pardon me.
No, I was just going to say one thing. Now, more and more nowadays, the people running the clinical trials, whether it's by a grant or a company, are trying to include money to offset the cost of transportation or travel to the site, if so that people from more locations can have the opportunity to participate. So you can always ask the researcher whether or not there's any, do they cover transportation, or is there anywhere to stay in that local area that would be accessible that they would cover for you.
And that's good. Always ask, because they can always say no, but you never know when you're going to hit a yes. And that's important too. Now somebody has written in about a lot of different trials. One is the NVG-291. We just call it Jerry Silver's trial.
Okay.
And somebody else, they've written in about acetyl L-carnitine, which is Russell Baylock. And even as far as going in with Elon Musk is doing with his neuro trials. Do you want to talk about some of these clinical trials? I know you know about some. We don't know about every single clinical trial, but we know a lot about a lot of them.
Yeah, I guess. Well, I would not want to give anybody any misleading information. And honestly, the source that I go to if I'm interested in a trial is to clinicaltrials.gov or to scitrials.org. And I'll go and I'll look at the detailed information and then go and start asking questions from there. Most everything on clinicaltrials.gov nowadays is legitimate, but you do need to be careful about some things that may be out there. For example, if you think that you're asking somebody about a clinical trial and they're saying that you have to pay money to participate in the intervention, that's not a valid clinical trial. But all of these other ones out there, if you're interested in the quote unquote Jerry Silver trial or any of these other trials, go and look them up on the different websites and start reaching out to people about them. I can't give any kind of prediction about when something will be approved or how fast things will be or anything like that, because that always blows up in your face.
There's always something that happens. It could be COVID. You never know. Something will happen. Now, here's one that I take this very seriously, and it's not really a question, but looking for advice. And the statement is, I have a brother in this condition, and it's hopeless. And that just tears at my heart. So, what are your thoughts there?
It's never hopeless. I mean, as human beings, we always have hope. I've been through my fair share of really difficult situations living with a C5 spinal cord injury, where I thought it was hopeless, but it was not. And in fact, if I hadn't had my spinal cord injury, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be here talking with Nurse Linda on the Reef Foundation webinar series, because my spinal cord injury changed so many things in my life for the better. And I'm a better person for having experienced all of those difficult life situations. And the best advice I can tell you is to try to reach out to other people living with spinal cord injuries and just talk about what you're going through, because you'll realize lots of us are going through the same thing and you're not alone out there. And then slowly try to figure out ways to make tiny steps forward. And there are a lot of ways to go forward in life.
And whenever you talk with somebody who has the same issue as you have, you're going to find they know exactly what you're talking. Well, maybe not exactly. Their life experiences are different, but they're going to have a good idea of what you're talking about. But even just talking with them and seeing them and what they're doing. Oh, I see you get around by doing this, or I see you do this certain thing, or you carry a water bottle with a long straw in it so you can get water. But you're going to pick up all kinds of things visually in hearing them, and just their tone and how they're relating to life. Really important to do. Yeah. So another question: how can a person with spinal cord injury recover his bowel and bladder function to control normally?
The big question that we are all dealing with, the everyday problems with.
Yes.
There has, thankfully, over the last few years, there's been growing interest in bladder and bowel complications after spinal cord injury. And there are an increasing number of clinical trials now also that are targeting bladder and bowel after spinal cord injury. And in fact, one promotion I will put out there, starting in January, February of next year, my team here in Cleveland will be investigating a non-invasive stimulation intervention to see if it helps to reduce bowel accidents after spinal cord injury. That's targeting surface stimulation of the genital nerve, which controls different parts of the bowel. And so there's a lot of research study opportunities out there. There's a lot of clinical guidelines out there for bowel management and different opportunities. And I would recommend, talk with your physician about it. If you're not happy with your bowel program, work together to try to change it so that you're not living your life, bound to the bowel problems, because I understand how horrible that part is when things are not going well with the bowel program.
Absolutely. That makes a huge difference but there are a lot of options out there, and there's a lot of things. It is kind of restrictive to have to do your bowel program at a certain time and a certain day, and there's a lot of regulating of all this ritualistic behavior that you have to get into, and but there's a lot of things on the horizon as well, so there's a lot of hope for that coming down the pike. So yeah. I'm pretty optimistic about the future in that regard. Now, that's not saying that it's going to come tomorrow afternoon, but it is in the nearer future than in the distant future. When, I don't know. when it will happen, nobody knows. And there's another question about bowels as well too, and the person asked, why do they need to use a suppository all the time?
Well, that's because the bowel is slowed down because of the spinal cord injury. People may not really realize it, but all of those automatic functions in your body, like your temperature control, your blood pressure, and the inner parts of your, intestinal, system and all of that, it's regulated by the autonomic nervous system, but the spinal cord regulates the autonomic nervous system. And so when you have damage to the spinal cord, you lose that dysregulation. Well, one of the things is that the transit time for things once you eat them to go all the way through your intestines and come out is slower after spinal cord injury. But also the bowel and the way that the bowel kind of like moves things through your body is paralyzed. And so you need the suppositories or the enemas to kind of like help trigger those things that would normally happen automatically without a spinal cord injury. And the best suppository that I live and die by is the Magic Bullet. And I've tried a lot of other ones. But if I have to be tied to a suppository, I'll be tied to the Magic Bullet any day.
And that's another thing too. Try different ones because they cost about the same. There's the mini enemas. Some people prefer that. I find that most people do their DigiStim very aggressively. And if you have that upper level injury in the cervical or the thoracic region of your body, when you do that aggressive digital stimulation, your bowel has a lot of tone and you're making that internal sphincter tighter and tighter and tighter. So if you're real aggressive with it, you're slowing your bowel program down. So take your time, be gentle. It might take a few more seconds to be gentle instead of this real aggressive stimulation, but your bowel program will work faster in the long run. So you can save time by being more gentle. Be kind to yourself.
Yes.
Now, this is a question that I think will end. Well, I have one more question after this for you, Kim, but this is a question that we just have to talk about this. Is disability included for research when they talk about diversity?
Oftentimes the answer is no. Oftentimes the answer is no. And I've been lucky enough to be involved in some new initiatives lately over the last year or so to try to include disability in these diversity initiatives. Because disability, if the numbers are about 25% of the population have some kind of a disability, and it should be included in diversity. But of course, if I spend all of my time in spinal cord injury research, so I spend all of my research on disability in individuals with spinal cord injury. But in the general research, a lot of disabilities are excluded from participation. So there's a lot of little conversations to start including disability, and everybody can contribute to that conversation by saying that disability should be included.
So if it's a research study for people who have spinal cord injury, and you have a spinal cord injury, if you meet the criteria, you'd be included. But if it's a research study about something like, I don't know, COVID, you might not be included.
You might not be included.
Or even though you might have a broken ankle because it got stuck in your wheel or something, but there's a study about broken ankles, you might not be included because, which is not right.
No, it is not right.
That is not right. But anyway, yes, that is something that I think we both are advocates for, very muchly so. So what would you be if you had to tell somebody 3 things today about your work, and what's the most important thing to look for, understand, get involved in, what will your 3 take-home points be?
Number 1 is to include people with spinal cord injuries as part of your research team. Number 2 would be try to be as inclusive as possible in your research, because you want your research to be able to ultimately be applicable to the real world situation. And the more inclusive you are, and the more that you embrace messiness, the more real world you are. And I guess the third one would be to keep moving forward. No matter how many barriers you run across in whatever realm you are in, you can keep moving forward and making progress.
Absolutely. Wonderful. It's just been wonderful having you on the show today. I can't tell you how much I have looked forward to this and how much I have enjoyed it. It's just been dynamite, and I'm sure that our listeners will be thinking the same thing as well. So I thank you very much. We are at the top of the hour. I would like to say that on January 11th at 2 p.m. Central Time, scheduled to appear on the professional webinar is Robert Fuller, who's an MD, PhD, and he's going to be talking about pregnancy. So that's a
Wonderful.
hot button topic. Yeah, let's talk about that. But today has just been wonderful. I appreciate everybody who's helped put this webinar together. It goes real smoothly on our end. So, you know, it's like they say about the royal family, the swan swimming on the top, but you don't see the feet paddling on the bottom. So I'd like to thank our people who do all of those things for us. And again, Kim, thank you very, very much for participating in this webinar today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure.